Claudette Marsh smiled the way people smile when they've rehearsed it, standing on the courthouse steps in a cream blazer that probably cost more than Nathan's monthly rent. She touched her attorney's arm and laughed at something he said, and the sound of it carried across the wet pavement like a small, deliberate cruelty. Nathan Reeves walked out behind them and stopped at the top of the steps. He had $43 in his checking account. He knew the exact number because he'd checked his phone in the men's room while the judge was still reading the settlement terms. The house went to Claudette. The savings went to Claudette. The catering business he'd built from a second-hand smoker and a folding table in his brother's driveway. The one that now had a commercial kitchen and 2 vans with the logo his daughter had drawn in crayon when she was 6. That went to Claudette, too, because her name had been on the LLC since the beginning. And in the eyes of the court, ownership is ownership regardless of who showed up every morning at 4 a.m. to start the brisket. He stood there in the October cold and watched her get into a black car, and he thought, this is what the end of 11 years looks like. A woman laughing, a car door closing, rain on concrete. He had nowhere to be. His daughter's name was Petra. She was 9. She had his ears and her mother's way of going very still and quiet when she was upset, which meant Nathan had learned to read stillness the way other people read expressions. When he picked her up from his sister Darlene's house that evening, and she sat in the back seat without asking about dinner, he knew she already understood that something had shifted. Kids always know. They just wait for you to catch up. Dad, she said, when he pulled into the parking lot of their new apartment, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old mail. Is this where we live now? For a while, he said. She looked at the building for a long moment. Did you bring my lamp? He had. It was the only thing she'd specifically asked for, a ceramic lamp shaped like a rabbit that she'd had since she was 3. He'd packed it in a shoebox with her name written on the side in marker. It's in the back, he said. She nodded and got out of the car, and he sat there for a minute after she closed the door, hands on the wheel, watching her walk toward the entrance with her backpack on. 9 years old. Pink sneakers. The rabbit lamp in a shoebox under his arm when he caught up to her. He told himself, you get 1 minute. 1 minute to feel it. Then you move. He moved. The first month was logistics, getting Petra enrolled in the new school, setting up the apartment with furniture from Goodwill and 1 decent couch his brother Wendell dropped off in a pickup truck on a Saturday morning. Nathan had put in calls to 3 commercial kitchens about subletting hours. He wasn't done cooking, he just needed a space, and 2 of them never called back. The 3rd offered him overnight slots at a rate that made the math barely work, but he took it. He was doing contract catering by then, small jobs, office lunches, a couple of birthday parties. Nothing like what Sable and Smoke had been. That was the business name, named for the color of a good crust and the thing that made the whole neighborhood slow down when the smoker was running. He hadn't been able to keep the name. That had gone too with everything else. He was 41 years old and starting over with a folding table. He didn't let himself think about it too directly. He focused on Petra's homework and the overnight kitchen and the small satisfaction of a good product. He focused on the next job and the one after that. He told himself the story of every person who had ever lost something and rebuilt it. And he believed the story, mostly, except at around 3 in the morning when the kitchen was quiet and the brisket was in, and he had nothing to do but wait. At 3 in the morning, the story was harder to hold. The call came on a Tuesday in February, 4 months after the courthouse steps. He almost didn't answer. The number was a Chicago area code, but he didn't recognize it, and he'd been getting calls from a debt consolidation company that had tracked down his old catering supplier invoices. So he developed a habit of letting unknowns go to voicemail. But something made him pick up. Petra would have said it was the universe. She was going through a phase where she said things like that, which he blamed on her teacher, Mrs. Hollings, who kept a crystal on her desk. Is this Nathan Reeves? A woman's voice. Professional, not reading from a script. Depends on who's asking. A beat. Then, my name is Ren Calloway. I'm the operations director for Calloway Capital. You catered a board dinner for us in November of 2021. A 40-person event at the Meridian Club. He remembered it. It had been one of Sable and Smoke's bigger corporate contracts, the kind that paid well and came with a rider of specific requests that he'd found mildly irritating at the time. No visible steam trays. All serving staff in black. Beef short ribs, not brisket, because someone on the board kept kosher. He'd adapted the rub twice that week. I remember, he said. The client has asked us to reach out to you specifically. She would like to discuss a potential engagement, catering for a private event, but also possibly something larger. She was particular about wanting to speak with you directly. Who's the client? Another beat. Wren Calloway seemed like someone who measured pauses. Her name is Adelaide Voss. Nathan didn't say anything for a moment. He was standing in the parking lot of a grocery store, paper bags in the back of his Civic, and he was fairly sure he'd misheard. Adelaide Voss was not a person you expected to call you. Adelaide Voss was the kind of name you read in business sections and then forgot about because she existed in a category of wealth so removed from ordinary life that it didn't feel real. She had started a logistics company at 26 in a borrowed office in Cincinnati, and had sold it 15 years later for a number Nathan couldn't say without it sounding like a joke. She'd since moved into hospitality real estate, hotels, resort properties, something with food and beverage that he'd read about vaguely in a trade publication someone had left in the overnight kitchen. "The Adelaide Voss?" he said. "Yes?" He stood in the parking lot. The paper bags had milk and frozen waffles and one bunch of bananas he'd bought because Petra had started eating a banana every morning after reading that it was what marathon runners ate, though she was 9 and not a marathon runner. "When?" he said. The meeting was at an office downtown that didn't look like an office. It looked like the kind of place where important things happened quietly. High ceilings, no logos on the walls, a receptionist who offered him water with the specific courtesy of someone trained not to convey any judgment about the person receiving it. Nathan had worn his good jacket, the charcoal one he'd kept through the divorce, because it had been in his car the day the lawyers divided the closets. Wren met him in the lobby. She was about his age, precise and unhurried, and she walked him to a conference room, a 4th floor with a view of Lake Michigan gray-green and flat under February clouds. Adelaide Voss was already in the room. She was 60, maybe 62, with silver hair cut close and a quality of attention that Nathan noticed immediately, the kind of attention that is rarer than money. She stood when he came in, which surprised him, and she shook his hand with both of hers. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "thank you for coming." "Nathan," he said. She gestured to the chair across from her and waited until he was seated. "I'll get to the point," she said, "because I think you'd prefer that." He would. He nodded. "I'm developing a property in West Loop. A food hall, 16 vendors, anchor restaurant, full bar program. It opens in 14 months. She slid a folder across the table. "I've been watching the Chicago culinary scene for 3 years. The vendors I've locked in are exceptional, but the anchor space is still open, and I haven't found the right operator." She paused. "At the Meridian Club dinner, I was a late addition to the guest list. No one knew I was there. I sat at the end of the table and ate your short ribs and watched your team work, and I thought, whoever is running this understands something that most people in this industry never figure out." Nathan looked at her. "What's that?" "That food is the easy part," she said. "What's hard is making the room feel like something. You did that. Your staff moved differently. The pacing was right. The whole event had a quality that I can only describe as considered, like someone had thought about every person in the room before they arrived." He was quiet for a moment. He'd spent a week on that event. He'd visited the venue twice before the dinner to walk the sight lines, think about where servers would cross paths, figure out the right moment to clear the first course without interrupting a speaker. It was the kind of thing he did automatically that he'd never been able to explain as a line item on an invoice. "I need an anchor operator," Adelaide said. "Someone who can build a restaurant program from scratch, train a team, and create something that doesn't feel like it was assembled by a committee. I've looked at a lot of people. I keep coming back to you." Nathan took a breath. "I should be honest with you. My last business. I'm not running it anymore. There were some legal complications after my divorce." "I know," she said simply, not unkindly. "I did my research." He studied her face for any sign of what kind of research, what conclusions. There was nothing to read except attentiveness. "Then you know I'm currently catering office lunches out of a borrowed kitchen," he said. "I know what you're doing now," she said. "I'm asking about what you're capable of." He didn't say yes in that room. He asked for time, which surprised her. He could tell from the slight recalibration in her expression, the way Wren glanced up from her notepad, and she gave it to him. 2 weeks. He drove home in the gray afternoon and picked Petra up from school and made pasta for dinner, because it was a Tuesday and Tuesday was pasta. He listened to her talk about a social studies project on Ellis Island, and a girl in her class named Brinley, who had eaten an eraser on a dare and had to go to the nurse. And he nodded and asked follow-up questions and cut her garlic bread into triangles because she didn't like rectangles. And all the while, something was moving in the back of his mind like a current he couldn't quite name. After she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. He wrote 2 columns, not pros and cons. He'd always found those reductive. He wrote what he knew and what he didn't know. What he knew, he could build this. He'd built something from nothing before, and he'd done it better the second time than the first, and if there was a third time, he knew things he hadn't known before. He knew how to hire. He knew how to read a room. He knew that the middle of a service on a busy Friday night was not the time to change anything, and that the week before opening was not when you decided on your menu. It was when you already knew your menu in your sleep. What he didn't know, whether Adelaide Voss was giving him this opportunity because she genuinely believed in his work, or because she needed a story, a redemption narrative, someone she could point to at press events. He'd seen that too in this industry, the way certain investors collected operators, the way others collected art, not for what they made, but for what they represented. He didn't think that was what this was, but he needed to know. He called Wren Calloway the next morning. "I have a question," he said. "Not about the terms, about something else." "Why me specifically? There are operators in this city with more capital, more press, better real estate track records. If she just needs an anchor tenant, there are simpler options." Wren was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Nathan did not expect. "She's been doing this for a long time," Wren said. "She's built a lot of things. Some of them she's proud of, and some of them she looks back at and sees exactly where she cut the corner she shouldn't have cut. The Meridian Club dinner was 3 years ago. She's thought about your short ribs and your staff and the way that room felt, and she's thought, that's what I want in my building. Not a name, not a brand. That." Another pause. "I've worked for her for 9 years. She doesn't change her mind about things like this." Nathan held the phone for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Tell her yes." The 14 months that followed were the hardest and most consuming of his adult life, and he meant that in the way people mean things they're glad happened. Adelaide gave him latitude he hadn't expected. She had opinions, strong ones, and she wasn't shy about them, but she drew a clear line between her domain and his. The bones of the space were hers. The food was his. She'd walk through during construction and point to the hood placement and say, "Will that work for your service flow?" and actually wait for the answer, and then sometimes change the plans based on what he said. He'd never worked with anyone like that before, in any context. He named the restaurant Gray Line. After the color of the lake on the day, he'd sat across from Adelaide and said yes, and after the line on his legal pad that divided what he knew from what he didn't. He built the team slowly, interview by interview, refusing to rush it even when Adelaide's project manager sent weekly emails about timeline. He was looking for something specific, and he knew it when he found it. People who cared about the work more than they cared about the title. His sous chef, a 28-year-old named Cordell, who had come up through a Michelin-starred kitchen and still made family meal every Sunday for the whole staff, met that bar in the first 10 minutes of conversation. His front-of-house manager was a woman named Bet, who had run a dining room in New Orleans for 12 years, and moved to Chicago after a hurricane, and had opinions about table spacing that she delivered with the confidence of someone who'd been proven right too many times to pretend otherwise. Petra came to walkthroughs on Saturdays. He'd get her a hot chocolate from the coffee cart down the block, and she'd walk the space in her coat and tell him what she thought, which was always more perceptive than he expected. She was 10 now. She'd started running, not marathon distances, but around the block in the mornings before school, which he took as a personality indicator rather than a sports indicator. She was the kind of person who decided to do something and then did it, and he recognized it because it was the same thing in him. "The tables are too close together," she said during one walkthrough, pointing at the layout taped on the floor. Bet, who was standing 3 feet away, looked at her. "That's exactly what I said." Petra nodded, as though this confirmed something she already suspected about the world. They moved the tables. 3 weeks before opening, Adelaide called him on a Thursday evening, not through Wren directly, which was unusual. "I want to show you something," she said. "Are you free Saturday morning?" He was. She picked him up at 8 in a black SUV with a driver, which he'd stopped finding awkward by month 4 of working together. They drove north for 40 minutes past the city edge into a stretch of highway that opened up into flat winter fields. He didn't ask where they were going. He watched the landscape and waited. They pulled off onto a private road that led to a small regional airport, the kind with a single terminal building and a row of hangars. The driver parked and Adelaide got out, and Nathan followed her across the tarmac to a hangar where a helicopter was sitting. Not her helicopter, it turned out. A cargo transport company she'd invested in, expanding their routes. She'd wanted his opinion on the catering program they were developing for a VIP tier. A small, specific thing, nothing like what he was already doing, but she'd thought of him. He stood in the hangar and listened to her, walk him through what they were building. And he realized something he should have understood months earlier. Adelaide Voss did not compartmentalize. She didn't have a business life and a separate relationship to the people she worked with. She thought about problems continuously, and when she thought of someone who could help with a problem, she called them. Not because they owed her something, because she was still curious about what they could do. He told her what he thought. Some of it was useful. Some of it was probably obvious. She listened to all of it. On the drive back, she asked him how Petra was doing. "She's running now," he said, "every morning before school." Adelaide looked at him. "How old is she? What does she want to be?" Nathan thought about it. "She says a veterinarian, but she also told her teacher she wants to design running shoes. And last week she told me she might want to be a judge." Adelaide smiled. "A real one, not the professional kind." "Good. All three of those things require someone who pays attention." "She pays attention," he said. They drove the rest of the way in the comfortable quiet of people who have run out of things to prove to each other. Gray Line opened on a Tuesday in April. The food hall had been covered in 2 major outlets before the soft opening, and there was a line at 7:30 for the 11 o'clock doors, which Cordell photographed and sent to the staff group chat with a single exclamation point. Adelaide was there, quietly, at a corner table with Wren, not announcing herself. Nathan saw her come in and she gave him a small nod and he gave her one back, and that was the whole of it. The service went well. Not perfectly. There was a fire suppression test at 2 that afternoon that no one had coordinated with correctly and cost them 40 minutes. But the team handled it in a way that told Nathan everything he needed to know about who he'd hired. Nobody panicked. Cordell rerouted the kitchen. Bet managed the dining room so smoothly that most guests probably thought it was scheduled. At the end of the night, Nathan was the last one out. He stood in the empty dining room in the dark and looked at the space he'd built. And he thought about the parking lot and the grocery bags and the frozen waffles and the 2 months he'd spent believing it was over. It wasn't over. It had just become something else. A month after opening, a woman came in on a Friday night and sat at the bar alone and ordered the short rib and a glass of something red and spent 45 minutes eating without looking at her phone. Cordell noticed her and mentioned it to Nathan because she came back the following Friday and did the same thing. The third Friday, she was there again. Nathan came out of the kitchen and introduced himself, which he didn't usually do. He was not a room-working chef, he found it performative. But something about the way she returned in that same particular quiet made him curious. Her name was Opal. She worked in architecture. She lived 6 blocks away. She said the short rib reminded her of something her father used to make, which she described with a specificity that meant she'd thought about it before saying it. He sat down across from her, and they talked for an hour. He was not telling this part of the story because it was the ending. He was telling it because it was a thing that happens when you stop being afraid of what's coming and start being present in what's already here. You sit down across from someone. You talk for an hour. The short rib is good, the light over the bar is warm, and outside the city keeps going, and you are no longer counting what you've lost. 6 months after Gray Line opened, Petra ran a 5K. She came in 43rd out of 87 runners, which she announced at the breakfast table with the matter-of-fact satisfaction of someone who had set a goal and met it. She'd put her bib on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. She was eating a banana. Nathan made her eggs. He thought about everything it had taken to get to this kitchen, this refrigerator this morning. The courthouse and the parking lot and the overnight shifts and the legal pad and the hangar and the empty dining room on opening night. Petra looked up from her banana. "Dad, are we okay now?" He thought about the question for exactly 1 second. "Yeah," he said. "We're okay." She nodded and went back to her banana, and Nathan turned back to the eggs, and outside the window the April light was coming in clean and early over the rooftops, the way light does when it has finally decided to stay.